All right, Professor Davis here, and now we're going to look at part 2 of our body systems. So we left off talking about the circulatory system. The circulatory system is going to be composed of your blood. The blood is going to help transport the oxygen and carbon dioxide. We also see that it's going to be pumped through your body through your heart. Your heart is the actual muscle or pump, and it's going to travel through blood vessels. Your vessels are a network of things called arteries and veins that are connected by capillaries. Now, this is true if you have a closed circulatory system. Now, the heart is the center of the cardiovascular system. It has complex muscle structure, and it does consist of 2 pumps. The top part of the pumps are the atria. They are going to pump the blood to the bottom part of the heart, so they're pumping the blood down. And the ventricles are then going to pump the blood out of the heart, either to the lungs or the rest of the body. So the right side of your heart is responsible for sending the blood to the lungs. So this is known as your right atria and your right ventricle. They are going to get the deoxygenated blood back from your body, and they do this through a main vessel called the vena cava. So this vena cava is going to have a branch that comes from the top called the superior and a branch that comes from the bottom, which is the inferior. And they're going to dump the blood into the right atria. The right atria then pumps it to the right ventricle, which then pumps it to the lungs. At this point, it's going to drop off the carbon dioxide and it's going to pick up the oxygen. This blood then returns to the left side of your heart. So blood moves from the right atria, right ventricle, through what we call the tricuspid valve to do this. Blood then leaves the right ventricle to the lungs to be reoxygenated, picking up oxygen. Once it does this, it gets pumped through the rest of the body tissues from the left side of the heart. So the left side of the heart also has 2 chambers, the atria and the ventricle. Blood comes from the lungs, and now it has oxygen. We call this oxygenated blood. The blood then moves from the left atria to the left ventricle through something called the bicuspid valve. The left ventricle then is going to be a lot larger or thicker in its muscle because it has to push the blood to the whole rest of the body. And it does this by pushing the blood into a vessel called your aorta. Your aorta is the main vessel that comes off your heart to where the blood then gets transmitted to the other parts of your body. All right. So blood is going to come in to the right side of the heart, and you'll notice that it is blue in color. This is to show you that it is low in oxygen, high in carbon dioxide. It then is going to end up leaving the right side of the heart to the lungs. When it goes to the lungs, it's going to pick up oxygen, and it's going to come back to the left side of the heart, and it is now a reddish color because it has picked up oxygen. Now, when this happens, the left side of the heart is going to then pump the blood to the rest of the body. Now, this idea of pumping the blood in between these different chambers is known as the cardiac cycle. This is the repeating sequence of the heart pumping. So it's this kind of structure where it's going to be this cycle that is going back and forth between these chambers. Now, this can be picked up because it is going to run on electrical impulses. So this is an electrical chemical signal that we can detect, and we can actually see the contraction and the relaxation. So systole is the contraction, diastole is the relaxation, but your heart never fully relaxes with pressure, and then this is what your blood pressure is. The top number is when it's contracting, the bottom number is when it's more relaxed, so like 120/80. The signal then moves across the atria, causing them to contract first, so they contract, and then the ventricles are relaxed. Then we see that as the ventricles contract, the atria relax. So it's going to go back and forth like this. These electrical impulses can be observed or seen in a picture type structure with an electrocardiogram. We call this an EKG or an ECG. Okay, and this is the one that you see that has the bump, and it comes up like this, and the bump, and it comes up like this. Okay, that we look at someone's heart rate. All right, and it's going to be picking up the electrical impulses. Now, blood vessels are going to carry the blood throughout the body. And when we look at these, they are going to be different based on how they are moving. So arteries take blood away from the heart. Okay, normally arteries are going to appear red because they're oxygenated, but pulmonary arteries are blue because they are deoxygenated and they're still moving away from the heart. These arteries are going to have a thicker wall to them because they have to be able to handle the higher pressure of the heart pumping. Now, the biggest vessel that you have that's an artery is the aorta. It then is going to branch into large arteries, medium-sized ones, small ones, and then we call them tiny ones, which are called arterioles. Arterioles just mean tiny arteries. These then are going to attach to capillaries. Capillaries are where the actual gas exchange takes place. These are microscopic blood vessels, and this is where the exchange of nutrients like sugars, proteins, fats happen, as well as oxygen and carbon dioxide between the tissues and the blood. We then see that these capillaries are going to attach to veins. Veins carry blood back to the heart. That's what they do, is they carry blood back. These walls are a lot thinner because they are only going to have very low pressure present. Now, because of this, they also have to have valves, because as we push the blood forward, when the pressure goes down, the blood will try to come back down with gravity, and a valve stops it. Okay, so then we push it to the next area, and then the valve stops it from coming back down. So the sequence here is going to be from capillaries to tiny veins that we call venules. These go into bigger veins, which are small, medium, then large, until we finally get to the biggest vein, which is the vena cava. And the vena cava is very large. It's about in diameter 1.5 inches, so it's a very large vessel. All right, so here's an example of a picture from your textbook that just shows you the different types of arteries and veins. It also has the heart measured, or the heart is pictured. And so these are not all of the arteries and veins that run through the body, but this is to just give you an example. A lot of times they're going to get named based on their location or the organ that they service the blood to. All right, so you have like the renal artery, that's to the kidneys, the hepatic arteries to the liver, the gastric arteries to the stomach. You also can have the brachial artery, which is in the top part of the arm. So they can be named based on their location or what organ they're going towards. The next system we want to talk about is the endocrine system. The endocrine system works with the nervous system to control and regulate your body's processes. But the endocrine system is going to do this through hormones. Okay, that's their main thing that they're going to use. These chemical messengers called hormones. Now they're going to be released from endocrine glands and endocrine tissue that's found within organs, and they're spread throughout the whole body. So they're not necessarily concentrated in one particular area. Now, hormones are the messages that are released to help maintain homeostasis. They are carried by the blood and other types of fluids to their target tissue. And so only tissues who have the receptors present are going to be the ones who respond to the message. Kind of like your phone. If you don't have reception, you don't get the message. Okay? And so you have to have the receptor in order to receive the message from these hormones. When hormones come in contact with the receptor, it causes the cell to respond somehow, whether that's to release something else or for the cell to then do something. Now, sensitivity to a hormone can be altered depending on how many receptors are present. It kind of like get on your phone based on how many bars you have, your connection. Upregulation means we get more receptors. That makes you more sensitive to the hormones. Downregulation is whenever we take them away and you're less sensitive to the hormones. So here is a chart that kind of just shows you where hormones kind of come from and their effects. So you do have the endocrine gland, which is the pituitary gland, and then we have the anterior and posterior part. The anterior produces a lot of hormones like growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. And you can see what each of these hormones do in the body. Growth hormone is pretty self-explanatory, is it helps your body tissues grow, whereas the adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates the adrenal cortexes. Follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone are important for gamete formation. These guys will spike during puberty. They are going to allow for reproduction. In the posterior pituitary gland, we have the antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. These are not made by the posterior pituitary, but they are released by the posterior pituitary. We then have the thyroid gland, which is a butterfly gland here in your throat. These guys produce T3 and T4 as well as calcitonin. There are little tiny glands on the back of the thyroid called parathyroid. There's 4 of them on the back side. These guys are going to be the parathyroid hormones, and they are going to help with blood calcium levels. The adrenal the adrenal glands are the little hats on top of the kidneys. These guys are going to have 2 areas, the cortex and the medulla, and each are going to give off 2 hormones. So the cortex is going to be aldosterone and cortisol, and the medulla is going to be epinephrine and norepinephrine. The last kind of main endocrine gland we're going to discuss, it's not all of them, but this is the last main one, is the pancreas. The pancreas also releases 2 specific hormones, and this is insulin and glucagon. Both of them are related to blood sugar. All right, our next system we're going to talk about is the musculoskeletal system, which is technically 2 systems put together, the muscles and the skeleton. The muscular and skeletal systems provide us with support of our body. It helps give us our shape, but it also allows us to move. Remember, animals are supposed to be motile or move some point in their life. So the skeletal system is made up of 206 bones. When we talk about an adult skeleton, it does provide you with structure and support. It stores minerals like calcium and phosphorus, and it also stores some fats in the bone marrow. The red bone marrow also is responsible for making blood. Okay, so your red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets are made in the bone marrow. The bones allow for attachment of muscles, which again allows for movement. And there are 2 divisions, and you can see them in this diagram. You have the axial skeleton, which is shown in the blue. It's this middle section of your skeleton. This is your skull, your vertebrae, which is your backbone, as well as your rib cage. Okay, so it's all this part in the middle. On the other hand, the appendicular skeleton is the skeleton that is going to make up your limbs. So your arms and your legs. This also makes up the points of attachment for your shoulder. Okay, so attaching where your arm attaches at your shoulder, as well as your pelvic girdle where your legs attach. So your pelvis is also part of the appendicular skeleton. This idea of how bones are articulated and put together are going to create something called joints. Joints are known as articulations. It's the point in which 2 or more bones meet together, and they are responsible for movement as well as some stability to your skeleton. When we look at joints, joints are classified a lot of times based on their structure and or their function. So it could be both. So you can see here we have some different types of joints, and so let's look a little bit closer. So structural wise, a lot of times these joints are going to be based on how they form. And so one are called fibrous joints. These are held together by fibrous connective tissue. There's no cavity or no space between the bones. So these guys don't move. Okay, these are things like the bones in your skull. When they fuse together, we don't want them to move. Also your teeth. Once your permanent teeth come in, we don't want them to continue to get loose, move, and pull out. And so these guys are known as fibrous joints. The second type of joints are the cartilaginous joints. These guys contain cartilage, thus their name, and they allow for a little bit of movement, not a lot. These are joints like in between your vertebrae. So they're going to let you move from like side to side, but they don't let you move like a whole bunch. Your vertebrae stays pretty consistent, but there are cartilage joints in between to allow for some movement. Synovial joints are the ones that have the maximum movement. These joints have spaces between them, which has fluid, which allows for more movement to take place. So because it reduces friction, because remember friction is heat. Your synovial joints include things like your shoulder, your elbow, your wrist, your knee, your fingers, your toes, your ankle. All of those would be considered synovial joints. And they allow for maximum movement. Like your shoulder can go in all kinds of different directions. All right, so those are known as synovial joints. Now let's talk about the muscles, because it's one thing in order to have the bones, but the muscles have to attach to the bones to allow you to have movement. So there are 3 types of muscles that we have in our body. Skeletal muscles are the ones that allow attachment to your actual bones to allow for movement. These guys are going to be striated, so you notice they have stripes across them. They're also very long cells that can then go to be shortened or elongate depending on if the muscle is contracted or relaxed. Now, these contraction speeds are super fast, all right, allowing you to react, and they are voluntary, meaning you have conscious control of your skeletal muscles with your brain. Cardiac muscle, on the other hand, is also elongated, but cardiac muscle is going to be found in the heart. You'll notice in this case they are also striped, but they're branched. See how there's spaces in between the cells? This is so they can talk through gap junctions, and so your heart can coordinate movement properly. These guys do have a moderate contraction speed, even though they can beat really fast. It's moderate. This allows them to not get where they cramp. Right? If we have moderate or slow speeds, we don't get cramps in those muscles, but you can in the fast ones like your skeletal. When we look at the moderate speeds here, this is also going to be based on your autonomic nervous system, automatic system. You do not have conscious control over that. Your brainstem has an area that's going to help maintain your heart rate. Smooth muscle looks a little different. These guys have tapered ends. These guys are found in a lot of your hollow organs or tubes, like your blood vessels, your stomach, your uterus, your bladder, that kind of thing. And these guys are non-striated. They don't have stripes. They have slow contraction speed, and they are also controlled by your autonomic nervous system. You do not have conscious control of moving your food from your stomach to your intestines. You don't have conscious control of what that blood vessel is doing on how it's constricting or dilating, okay? This is all part of the autonomic nervous system. So let's talk a little bit about these branches of the nervous system. Your nervous system works with the endocrine system to control everything else in your body, okay? Now, hormones help control things, but they're chemicals and they work slower, whereas your nervous system controls things fast, okay? There's two divisions. You have your central nervous system, which we also abbreviate as CNS, and this is your brain and your spinal cord. On the other hand, you have your peripheral nervous system, PNS, which is going to be your peripheral sensory and motor nerves. So they're off to the side. They're the parts that leave the spinal cord, okay, that go down into your arms, your legs, other parts of your body. Now, your nervous system is made up of neurons. Neurons are the functional cells, the specialized cells that are going to receive information and transmit information. These guys run on electrical signals. These electrical signals are known as action potentials. Now, with neurons, they kind of look like your hand. They have little extensions that are called dendrites, like your fingers. They have a cell body, which is known as kind of like the soma, which is your palm of your hand. And then they have an axon. The axon is going to send the signal to the next neuron. So these guys can be connected in a network. Okay, they can be connected in a network. They also may have a special kind of insulation around them, kind of like how we have insulation around the electrical cords, in order to make sure the electricity goes in one direction. Now, one neuron can always communicate with another, and a lot of times they will communicate through the process of chemicals called neurotransmitters. Now, these neurons need to be taken care of because once they die, they don't come back. So they need to be taken care of properly. And there are specialized cells called glia cells that are going to provide support and protection to the neurons. They're going to help take care of them. So here's an example of the neuron. The neuron is in yellow, so you can see the little dendrites, which are like the finger-like extensions. You have the body, and then you have the axon. The axon is covered in that kind of turquoisey color, which is the myelin sheath, but there are special cells like the oligodendrocytes, which are glial cells, who are helping take care of this part of the neuron. All right, and you'll notice that the neuron has got connections on both sides, so it's talking to things on both sides. So your central nervous system, let's talk about your brain a little bit. This is both your brain and your spinal cord, and they are protected by a special covering of tissue called the meninges. The meninges have 3 layers to them. The dura, which means tough mother, and it is really tough. You can't hardly break it. We also have the arachnoid mater, which kind of looks like a spider web type layer, and then the pia mater, which is real delicate right up against the tissue. We also see another area of protection for your spinal cord and your brain is the cerebral spinal fluid. This is a fluid that allows it to float right now in your cavities, and this is going to act as a shock absorber. It's going to absorb any shock that happens. So like when you shake your head, your brain's not just hitting the sides of your skull. Your brain is located in your cranial cavity, your head cavity, and we do see that it is broken down into different sections. And so we do have the cerebral cortex, which is the highest part of the brain. This does have 2 hemispheres, a right side and a left side. They are connected by a structure called the corpus callosum. These guys are going to contain some different lobes, and so those get named based on the bones that cover them. So you have the frontal lobe here in the front, you have parietal on the side, temporal here, and then the occipital is in the back. There's also a special structure that kind of runs through this whole area called your limbic system. The limbic system is where your emotions lie. And then there's also the basal nuclei, which is going to be for more muscle control and posture. Now, this is not the only area that controls muscle control and posture, but it does help with some of it. Now, as we move down, we see that there is an area in the very middle of your brain called the thalamus. The thalamus is the relay station. This is the area where when information comes up, it then gets determined where it needs to go. Kind of like old school operators, if you've seen them with the phones, where you call the operator and tell them you want to call somebody, and they actually take the cord and attach it and connect you to that individual. That's what the thalamus kind of does here. The thalamus also, like if you're into movies, this would be like the control center and Inside Out. Below the thalamus is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls your endocrine system. It works with your endocrine system, and it also helps maintain a lot of your homeostasis in your temperature. So this homeostasis area is present in the hypothalamus. So temperature would be regulated, blood sugar may be regulated, things like that. The cerebellum is the back part of the brain. This is going to control balance, and it also aids in coordinating movements. This area is affected greatly by alcohol, and that's why a lot of these sobriety tests are testing for your coordination and your movement. The lowest part of the brain is called the brainstem. It actually connects the brain to the spinal cord, and the brainstem contains a lot of vital centers. These are the parts of the brain that are going to control things that you don't have conscious control of, like your breathing and your heart rate and your digestion, your swallowing, all those different things. Now you can adjust them to a degree, but these areas have those vital centers that are required. So if the brainstem is where the injury has taken place, we do see that they might be brain dead very quickly because of the fact that then they can't breathe on their own or be able to have their heart beating. We then have the spinal cord. The spinal cord is going to connect from the brainstem and extend through the spinal canal down. It's primarily there to transport signals to and from the brain. So it takes information from your peripheral nervous system to the brain. The brain processes it and sends the signal back down so that the spinal cord then can talk to the rest of the body to tell the body how to react. So sensory information goes up to the brain and motor information comes down from the brain. We also see your spinal cord is where reflexes are found. Last but not least is your peripheral nervous system. This is a connection between the central nervous system and the rest of the body. There are 2 divisions. There's the sensory, which is going to take the information up to your brain. This transmits information from your skin, your muscles, any kind of internal organ, and then tells the central nervous system what's going on. We then see that it processes it, and then it will send a signal back down, and that's going to be with the motor part. Now, when we look at this, the somatic nervous system is going to be under more of your control. So when even though there's going to be some reflexes that happen, let's just say that you touch something hot, you will have a withdrawal reflex that occurs. This is going to be part of that sensory or somatic nervous system. But on the other side, if let's say you're pulling something hot out of the oven, but you don't want to drop it, you can override that reflex of letting go and go ahead and take care of it. Now, you might be hurt in the process, but it's still part of that system. The autonomic nervous system, on the other hand, you don't have conscious control. It's automatic, thus its name. This is going to relay information from your central nervous system to most of your internal organs. Now, there's two branches of this. It's called the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight. This is when your body is stressed or you feel like you're in danger. This part takes over, okay? Increasing your heart rate, putting you more on alert, increasing blood flow to your muscles, that kind of stuff. The parasympathetic nervous system is known a lot of times as your rest and digest. This is when you're calm and you are able to do just normal processes. So let's look at these kind of in a picture. If you look at the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerve systems, they are normally opposing things. So in the parasympathetic rest and digest, your pupils will be more constricted. But in the sympathetic, they are more dilated. We see that parasympathetic stimulates more salivation or more saliva. The sympathetic inhibits that. So they're kind of opposites. Slower heart rate, higher heart rate. Okay, constricts your breathing, enhances your breathing. Okay, inhibits your digestion, stimulates your digestion. Okay, so they're opposites. So take a look at them where again you have parasympathetic shown more in the blue and yellow, and you have your fight or flight or sympathetic shown in the green and the red. Okay, so as you review this, if you have any questions on this part 2 over body systems, please let me know.